Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Tony Kinnett.
Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYBC.
WCYTV here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first out of 93 WYBC Indianapolis. Now, if I sound a little under the weather, it's because I am. And whenever I travel anywhere, I usually get sick. It's kind of a special talent of mine. So if you bear with me with that, we'll get right into the quick news because heavens to Betsy, there was a lot of it between Friday and today. The best way this can be summed up is that there is complete and total federal agency reform happening in the United States government. This has to do with what I believe is the most effective use of the Trump Doctrine, which is a kind of McKinley-esque Teddy Rooseveltian doctrine in which the president sides with the populist group of the American people against a technocratic series of agencies that have ruled against them. Earlier in the 20th century, you had McKinley and Roosevelt acting against kind of the larger interests of kind of corporate entities in the United States Senate. And now you have the President of the United States through the executive branch, through Congress, and then, of course, through many of the various special interest groups at the behest of the president that are acting against the federal agencies that have grown with quite a bit of bloat. We're going to go through them. We've got a lot to talk about this evening. So first and foremost is the FBI. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is in complete disarray. According to Christopher Wray, the former head of the FBI, who actually went on CNN to complain that because Trump went ahead and revoked a lot of the clearances of the intelligence agents who lied about what was and was not Russian disinformation, specifically covering up for Hunter Biden and Joe Biden at the time running for president of the United States. That would be covering up the Burisma, influence peddling, and other acts of treason that might have been committed by the son of the then vice president, or former vice president then, and then, of course, later president of the United States. So this is where things get really interesting because Donald Trump has made it very clear that when he gets into office the second time, that was during on the campaign trail, when he finally made it in, he was going to release a lot of documents to the American public, including releasing a lot of information about the January 6th protest and riot, including things like why the National Guard wasn't dispatched, although Trump had offered those troops. Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Bowser of Washington, D.C. turned those down. Also, the investigation of Americans and the unfair treatment of those, the cruel and unusual punishment of those, for example, who were convicted of crime, both violent and nonviolent, in the January 6th riots. We have discovered now that 5,000 out of the 13,000 agents in the FBI were focused at one point on January 6th protesters and rioters. That is wild. Additionally, anonymous FBI officials have filed a class action lawsuit against Trump's DOJ to prevent the identification of agents who worked on January 6th cases and Jack Smith's cases against Donald Trump. This was filed in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. That is also wild because if you are an agent of the FBI, you do not have special rights over your commander-in-chief. That's not a thing. If the commander-in-chief wanted to declassify absolutely everything right now, he is free to do so. He is the commander-in-chief. He commands the Department of Justice. He commands the armed services and the separate 6 entities thereof, as well as the agency apparati, which comprise all of the federal bureaucracy. And by the way, I would like to point out, if you do not like the President of the United States holding that much power, then maybe the federal agencies shouldn't exist in the first place with such unilateral authority over Americans. If you don't like the idea of the president being able to completely declassify and release the names of FBI agents who are connected with certain investigations, maybe the president of the United States shouldn't have unilateral authority over the FBI, or the scope of the FBI's power should not be so overreaching. You know, just kind of a concept there. It does not get better. In fact, it gets worse for those which are great lovers of the swamp-like infrastructure of the establishment in Washington. This brings us to the USAID. So, USAID or USAID, it's the United States Agency for International Development. I'm going to call it USAID because that's easier. I know everyone wants to be precise. That's what I'm going with here. USAID has been around for a good while. It was signed into being via executive order to give the President of the United States a little wink-wink diplomacy money. Let's talk about wink-wink diplomacy money. So during the Cold War, the Soviet Union had a lot of starving people, had a really sucky economy, and also was known for being really freaking scary and awful. And so in order to get other countries to work with them, the Soviet Union bribed individuals and also cudgeled those along the edge of the Iron Curtain into their iron will via espionage, via direct military intervention, via assassination, and through foreign financial projects. And the Soviet Union's goal to do this was to spread communism throughout the world. So the United States created USAID via an executive order to give the president a bit of diplomatic money to spend however he pleased in order to keep communism at bay. So that meant that if, for example, the Soviet Union wanted to invest in a certain South American nation, then the United States would intervene and would basically bribe the South American country to work with the United States instead. What the USAID has become, is an extremely corrupt, watered-down mess of a corrupt organization. United States aid, and we've known this for such a long time, has been a festering boil of corruption. Now, here's where things get interesting. So, Donald Trump's appointed Department of Government Efficiency Commission, headed by Elon Musk, went forward with Trump's permission and sought records from USAID to start doing an audit, looking through what the U.S. Treasury and USAID have been doing over the last couple of decades. An amazing thing happened. They said no. Elon Musk is a citizen of the United States. He immigrated legally and has the authority as a citizen of the United States to request official documents pertaining to the financial disbursement of the executive branch. And so, long story a little bit shorter, Trump had to force USAID to allow those from DOJ, this independent commission by Trump, to basically audit the federal government. Trump had to shove the door open for them because, again, this agency wouldn't even let people in. By the way, that's not legal. There is no federal agency without cause for explicit national security interests via espionage manners, of which only certain agencies are even a part of, or are allowed to draw from that particular statute. Like the Department of Health and Human Services, although they may claim the ability to do so, doesn't have the right to just withhold information from the American people. That's not a thing. So once we finally got in, oh dear sweet heaven above, what we discovered in USAID that they have spent money on over the last couple of decades is downright disgusting. So, first of all, I will point out that when Senator Joni Ernst asked to review the USAID financials, they threatened a lawsuit against her, which is in and of itself insane, but let's go through some of these things. So, from Joni Ernst's office, $2 million was given for Moroccan pottery classes, $2 million for promoting tourism to Lebanon, $20 million for a Sesame Street-style puppet show in Iraq, sending Ukrainians to Paris Fashion Week, $9 million to feed Syrians, which, by the way, ended up in terrorist hands, not in the hands of Syrian civilians, $1 million for research in a certain Wuhan laboratory. Let's keep moving. Tablet magazine reports $500,000 for efforts to expand atheism in Nepal, $45 million for diversity scholarships in Burma, $70,000 for a DEI musical in Ireland, $32,000 for transgender comic books in Peru, $47,000 for transgender opera in Colombia. That is bonkers. And this is not new, by the way. Rod Dreher reported back in 2016 that USAID spent $300,000 in an effort to, quote, queer the Balkan Christian nation of Macedonia, end quote. So the left come through an absolute just pitching a fit, which, day ending in Y kind of a situation. And the reason they threw such an absolute fit is because the gravy train, the money laundering situation is over. By the way, USAID has also provided lots of money to various organizations connected to nonprofits that donate to Democrats, which gives, again, a nice headwind right to the corruption and money laundering allegations. It's an absolute mess. And so Donald Trump froze USAID. And then we get to the left's reaction to it. So we'll be back in a second for the radio crowd. For the live stream crowd, we're going to stick around and talk about some of these reactions. So that brings us to the reactions, which are, about as insane as you would think. The left pitched an absolute fit that Elon Musk was leading this effort. So they immediately decided to say, well, it's because he's a super corrupt, stinky, awful billionaire who is auditing the government and releasing it to the people. That's why he's bad. Here's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling Musk an unintelligent billionaire.
This dude is probably one of the most unintelligent billionaires I have ever met or seen or witnessed. Which, you know, you can probably even glean that from watching these people on TV. Anyways.
This is coming from the lady who literally did not know how many branches of government we had is always an impressive slam. By the way, I should point out that we also had individuals like Representative Jim McGovern from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, who claimed that Elon Musk wanted to, quote, illegally shut down agencies created by and for the American people so you can give billionaires like yourself more tax breaks, end quote. Trump has authority over executive agencies, especially executive agencies like USAID, which were created by executive order. All of the agencies created by executive order, Trump can freeze or shut down temporarily. At the very least, Trump can allocate the funds in those agencies really where he chooses. And we'll talk about that with the Department of Education and one of the folks from Parents Defending Education here in a minute. But we're not done with the insane, goofy gooberness. Senator Chuck Schumer, because the Senate Democrats cannot avoid setting themselves on fire every moment of every day now, decided to claim that, man, if Musk is going after USAID, what's next? The IRS?
We also know this is just the beginning. If Doge attacks USAID today, then you can be sure they'll move on to another target tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the Postal Service or the IRS or even the Social Security Administration. They could be next. Or maybe our national security agencies.
I don't think that he understands at all what Americans are looking for at all, in any way, shape, or form. We'll talk about that a little bit later regarding the Trump Doctrine on foreign policy. That's going to take an entire segment in and of itself. Now, this evening, we have a lot of Democrats in Washington, D.C. protesting those poor federal agents spending money on transgender comics. Oh, those poor agents. So here's a New Jersey representative who is threatening actual insurrection in the United States, which, you know, I was told was kind of illegal.
Republicans, that we will not take this. We will fight back. Fight back. Fight back. And as I close out, because I know we've been out here for a long time, and shut down the Senate. We are at war.
Oh.
Anytime a person can pay $250 million into a campaign and they be given full access to the Department of Treasury of the United States of America.
Now that's wild. That's a thing, one might say. Then Jasmine Crockett, our congressional crackhead, who genuinely, anytime she speaks, sounds like she's yelling at me outside of a speedway. She also screamed some threats and things outside at this protest.
But let me tell y'all something. I know some of y'all have been frustrated, and you've been saying, where are the Democrats? Where are our leaders? Well, I'm here to tell you that we ain't never left y'all. All right? We are here. We are also going to make sure that they uphold the law. We are not going to sit around while you go ahead and desecrate our Constitution, or you look at the laws that have been passed into law. And
I love it when she says that she's concerned about the Constitution. That just gives me the giggles. We'll talk about her a little bit later because, believe it or not, that's the second craziest thing that she has said in the last 48 hours. We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. It's a joy to be joined by Vice President of Parents Defending Education, Carolyn Moore. I got to tell you, I'm used to seeing those of us in the education space kind of playing defense. It's a little bit unusual to be on the offensive at this particular point in time by getting things done. We'll get into the Department of Education stuff in just a couple of minutes, but as someone who spends a lot of time poring over the ed data, what was the first thought that went into your head as soon as the NAEP scores, the education assessment scores came out for our country this year?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think that the first thought through my mind, which is probably the same thought everyone else had, was gosh, there's absolutely no correlation between the money we are spending and the educational outcomes of the kids across this country. And I think you can look at different states to see, particular differences, drops, whatever. But overall, I mean, the end all be all is that they keep spending more money. During COVID, they had all these ESSER funds that went to every single school to improve, technology or whatever it went to. And it's clear the money was not spent for teachers to be having one-on-one interaction with their pupils and get them up to grade standards. So I think that was my main takeaway.
I mean, the grade standards aren't exactly solid gold pieces of assessment to begin with. So the fact that we can't even meet these newer, lower standards that have been revised at a much lower bar than maybe 20 or 30 years ago, it's such an embarrassment on the world stage. But it's also disturbing considering how difficult it is to get a student from the job market right out of high school into what career they'll be choosing or where they're going to be getting into things, because it's not like when you could just drop out when you were in 4th or 5th grade and go work in a factory. That's not the standard anymore. So there's also a higher set of standards on the outside of the grade school environment. And it's like a triple whammy, if I could, kind of put it in colloquial terms here. And I'm still not seeing, other than the school choice movement, which we can talk about, which is making amazing strides. I'm not seeing any on the public school side of things, a solution that's been put forward that's actually going to close these gaps, because the gaps are still there no matter who's in the administration, right? Someone has to make up the lost ground.
Oh, absolutely. I think you bring up a great point. I think, the school choice movement is great, but unfortunately, there are still a lot of people in public schools who either don't understand what school choice is or think it's like some really, crazy conspiracy thing, something, akin to like homeschooling. It seems like so out of the ordinary. They don't know anyone who's done it, so it seems crazy, which we all know it is not. But there's still always going to be about 50% of people who are just in public schools, and their parents probably aren't going to pull them out. They're going to remain in that school from the beginning to when they graduate, whether they go into a vocation or they go into higher ed. And like what you said, they haven't put forth any ideas. Now, I think, some of these executive orders and stuff, they're great. But I think what we're seeing from, the teachers union side is they're more interested in advocating for international issues, like protesting for Gaza or putting, that's their emphasis.
Wild. And again, whether you see the teachers unions as an organization that is supposed to advocate on behalf of the working conditions, the rights, the pay scales, the pensions of teachers, or you see it as an institution as they claim to be, which is advocating for quality education, it's failing on both sides. You could even make a very slight, poorly constructed argument that when they throw all of their weight behind DEI stuff and critical race theory and gender ideology, at least you could make a case that, well, they're supporting teachers and students who feel this way. But like these international issues and things that they're throwing millions of dollars into, it doesn't even have anything at all to do with their state mission or their actualized mission. And it is yet another embarrassment that so much of our nation's money, and in many states, teachers' money, in some cases unwittingly or without any alternative, goes into these organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, I think teachers, just as parents, they want these kids to succeed, because what would be the point of going to school? You're teaching for 8 hours a day. What would be the point of doing that every day if you didn't care about the children? Obviously, they care about the children, but I think, exactly what you're saying about the DEI stuff, also the international stuff. The new Secretary of Transportation put out a statement the other day because of all these, terrible FAA things. And he said something about, we need to get rid of talking about immutable characteristics and treating people differently. Let's bring it back to basics. Let's bring it back to having safe, reliable transportation. And I think that's exactly what can be said for education. I mean, let's teach kids how to read and write. They took cursive out of schools. Maybe, crazy thought, like, why don't you bring cursive back? Just bring back the basics And then let's see how they do. Let's not teach them for a test. Let's not focus on activism. Let's just teach the kids how to read and how to do math. And then, you know what? We don't have to worry about all those other things. They can make up their own minds about political things and social movements.
It's the stumbling block that immediately just gets thrown into the way whenever we bring up that kind of a discussion, though. And for the record, obviously, I agree with that. You know, not only is it backed by objective data, it's also backed by groups right now, especially in homeschooling and some charter and private school communities that are trying this out immediately. They suggest, and when I say they, I'm talking about the left-leaning education advocates and college professors class. They start suggesting that if we don't allow public schools to spend a good portion of their resources on equitable counseling and conversations about what's going on today on the ground in the civil rights struggles of DEI in Sudan or whatever else, that our students aren't going to be learned on the things that they consider to be essential. I'm just at a bit of a loss where legislators have the backbone to look at someone who says, oh, well, you need to teach lesbian basket weaving, otherwise what's the point? And say, no, basic reading is a priority to the point where they're willing to be called bad things. This is still an issue in kind of the Republican side of the aisle, is they don't want to be seen as evil. So they don't really want to tamper with how public education works. And again, like you said, executive orders are fine, but there's just a little bit more reformation, at least in front of us.
Absolutely. But I am hoping, you know, with just a change in leadership. I mean, people, you know, these legislators, the state and federal level, they seem a little bit more empowered. And so I'm thinking that, you know what, whatever, do these people really need to be empowered? They're already elected, you know, but I think that helps them. That gives them a mandate. It gives them a backbone because like you said, I mean, unfortunately, I don't understand why this is because I think as conservatives, they're very strong-willed people. But for some reason, there's like such a fear of being the bad guy. But I think you have to know at the end of the day, what you're doing is the right thing for the kids. Like maybe it's not going to be an immediate thing, but I mean, long-term, this will help them succeed.
I think maybe that in that statement is a bit of the problem, which is that we're going to have to experiment. We're going to have to experiment. We're going to have to see what works and what doesn't. The problem is that the only guinea pigs available for the study are kids. And that immediately sounds off warning bells. But you shouldn't experiment on children. Oh, the horror, the pearls clutching starts immediately. Well, we do need to experiment to see what are the best educational methods for children. And that involves parents really taking a chance on putting their kids in a different educational system or trying. It's really the parents who have the right to make this chance. And although perhaps with the connotative language of the word experiment, it sounds horrible. How could you experiment on children? And in reality, we do need to experiment on different educational methods. But instead of experimenting on what pride flag to hang in the classroom, it needs to be what reading methodologies in education are the best we can find and how we incorporate those. And
absolutely.
You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And this is genuinely a case where we need to be open that just because the word experiment comes into play that, you know, we can't shutter the doors and call it a day.
Oh, I completely agree with you. But I think that every parent knows if you have, you know, more than one child, you can tell, oh, you know, Susie, I mean, she's a hands-on learner. And George, I mean, actually, he's more interested in recess, but if you can get his attention, you know, he really likes science and math and he just excels or whatever the issue, you know, every kid's different. And so I think teachers know that too. And I don't think that that's anything different than has been done now. I mean, we can call it an experiment, but I mean, that's been done previously. You know, if kids aren't fast learners or they learn a different way, maybe there's more one-on-one interaction. Like bring parents back to the classroom and help them read with the kids. There's such like a fear of having parents around at this point, ever since, you know, all the stuff with COVID and the book stuff. And it's actually ridiculous because parents are a resource and they should be looked to as such. They know their kids really well. The teachers do too. And together, I mean, you can really help these kids move on and be contributing members of society.
There also needs to be a different threshold for what we consider to be a success point. You have so many different state standards. We were running out of time, but just to throw this, because I know you guys over at PDE are quite fond of this one particularly. When you're looking at the threshold for success in state standards across the country, there's a standard for understanding the cultural significance of Chinese music in the 1800s. It's like, why is that a standard for education? I get it. By the way, Chinese music from the 1800s is really cool. Goes through 3 different reformations. Bet I didn't know that one, huh? But like it is really neat. Should it be a standard for K-12 education? No. Like you got to prioritize some things over the other. We don't want to seem to do that in this country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of those standards are outdated. And that's something that definitely needs to be looked into, especially. I think it's
also better like virtue signaling. Like, our students, they know totally Chinese music from the 1850s. It's like, what?
Well, I mean, that's like, people who can talk about they take Mandarin. Okay, that's great. I mean, but you obviously went to a different school because the rest of us, had Spanish and French and we can barely count to 10. So, I mean, I think, language and stuff is wonderful. And I think learning about different cultures is wonderful. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think baseline, we need to, just have people know the basics of, start with American history and then let's work our way backwards.
I think you're exactly on the right track. By the way, I'll have you know that just when you said Spanish or French, it took considerable effort not to say habla por ti or speak for yourself. No, but I really appreciate you guys over at Parents Defending Education. We've been a fan of you guys since the beginning. Thrilled of the work that you and Nicole Neely are doing. You guys are truly some of the best advocates for parents and for great research. Your database, I think we've pushed on the show before, maps around the country, a map of issues around the country so that parents and legislators can stay informed. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. We're coming in with a bit of breaking news, postponing the rest of the show, at least for the moment. President Donald Trump, in a dual news conference, a press conference with Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, has made what is a considerable change in U.S. foreign policy. And we're going to air it for you right here. This is the President of the United States in a massive change on foreign policy regarding the Israeli-Hamas war and the Gaza Strip.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different.
That is a major, major change in United States foreign policy. The President of the United States said, and in completely certain terms, that the United States would take over in the Gaza Strip. That is a major, major development. That is a major change in foreign policy for this country. Now, there are a couple of things off the bat that should be noted. First of all, I would say that this might be a situation in which the United States is, or at least, as far as the Trump administration is concerned, in which he could be floating the idea out, as the president has done throughout most of his time in the political sphere, in which he says something that he's going to do, and then he waits to see the public reaction for it, and then he decides later on if or he is or isn't going to do the thing. This is something Trump does. Now, do I necessarily agree with it? I don't know if that's really germane to the situation. This is something that Trump does. He pitches an idea forward, and then based on the public response, he said before that he doesn't like polling. He thinks polls are too expensive. He says, I could do that for free. So this could be one of those situations. If this is a situation in which the United States actually does take over the Gaza Strip, you need to consider whether or not the president of the United States is going to allow the individuals who are a part of the PLO, the Palestinian leadership, which is, a supplier of various terror organizations and a proxy network through Iran, or the individuals who support Hamas leadership, which is the majority of the population in Gaza, according to every available poll, according to the videos of people celebrating in the streets whenever there is anything that happens to Israel or the United States, whenever a hostage is paraded through the streets. The people, the civilians of Gaza, cheer wildly. It is unclear if, or in any case, of the United States taking ownership, whether through Israel or whether itself taking ownership of the Gaza Strip, that it's unclear whether or not Trump would be in favor of allowing individuals to remain there. And the reason I say it's unclear, Trump has said that he wants the individuals in the Gaza Strip who are Arabic Muslims to be removed from the area because Gaza's pretty well destroyed, because of Hamas hiding behind hostages and not fighting mano a mano, that Trump has suggested that Jordan and that Egypt take the Palestinian, the Gazan refugees, the civilians and individuals inside of the Gaza Strip. Now those nations of Egypt and Jordan have both turned that down. And of course they would. I mean, you look at other regions across the Middle East in which Palestinian civilians were refugees to, and they completely corrupt and destroy that country. Jordan knows this very personally. So looking at Egypt, although Egypt, according to what appear to be some photographs and some evidence of tunnels and access, it appears that while parts of Egypt might have been benefiting and aiding the terrorist organization inside Gaza, Egypt isn't willing to take them for the same reason. It is a group of individuals who are incredibly fanatic, who are very supportive of an evil terrorist regime. And so for the United States to take over Gaza, it brings an interesting question as to what that would look like. Now, if Trump is treating this as he's treating the migrant situation in the United States, a Teddy Rooseveltian administration by the United States or by any United States proxy, such as Israel, for example, would be very different. And the reason I say very different from a George Bushian or a Nikki Haley kind of neocon administration in an area is that a neocon administration, so for example, with Iraq, Afghanistan, the idea is that you go in and you set up a foreign-held democracy. So you go around, you say, all right, foreign nationals, people who are here in this country who are native to the area, we're going to give you a democracy and we're going to train you. We're going to educate you in how to run a democracy. And it doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. It's not clear what it is that Trump is planning on doing at this particular time. Now, relating back to what we have talked about in the first segment with regard to USAID, USAID had given $2.1 billion to Gaza. $2.1 billion to Gaza. That was before October the 7th, by the way. Now, Ann Coulter has quipped that might have been for hang gliders. And by the way, that is a very prescient comment because Trump has also made the case that as far as he's concerned with Gaza, the individuals that are residing in that area are exceptionally violent and have supported brutal regimes and have done so for a very long time. The attack on October the 7th was premeditated. Before that, the groups inside of Gaza, including Hamas, were ripping water pipe from the ground and taking pipe meant for the construction of water systems and sewer systems and creating them into poorly built rockets. Why do I say poorly built? Because they don't even have a good shot percentage where they make it out of their initial trajectory area. And they end up hitting their own hospitals and things. in the process, or hitting the parking lot outside of hospitals. So Trump's also made the statement just a few seconds ago that he would like to get all of the hostages out. And he said, if we don't, it will just make us somewhat more violent, end quote. So this is really where the United States foreign policy angle under the second Trump administration bears a lot of fruit from the first administration, in which Donald Trump was in no way, shape, or form scared of just hitting with the hammer. We saw this already in the second administration with Trump ordering airstrikes on ISIS targets in Somalia. We've seen this with Donald Trump making particular stances in regard to flying surveillance drones and jets, perhaps, over Mexican airspace in conjunction with the Mexican government after some concessions. We'll talk about that in just a couple of moments. But for the United States to make a stance through the president to take over Gaza in a, quote, ownership position, end quote, that's a major shift. That's a major investment into the Middle East. There's a lot more that's going to go into that in the next couple of days, I'm sure. Obviously, this will require a statement from Pete Hegseth, a statement from Marco Rubio. This could be a situation in which Donald Trump is kind of floating an idea out to the rest of the world and waiting for feedback. This could be a situation in which Trump is just tired of dealing with this and is ready to just close the door on it. We're seeing that increasingly in Trump's discussions with other foreign leaders around the world, that he's not really playing any games. That's the true bearing of the fruit from the first administration. So much of Trump's first term was spent dealing consistently with hang-ups, individuals sabotaging him from inside the federal agencies. That has come out again and again and again. That now Trump is moving hard, fast, right to the point. And we're going to have to see what that looks like, not just in this Middle Eastern situation, but also in the rest of the foreign policy spheres in South and Central America, as well as Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, as well as the Asian sphere of influence from China to the South Pacific. We'll be back in just a second to talk a little bit more about this foreign policy Trump doctrine and what that has to do with Mexico, Canada, Panama, Colombia, and tariffs. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. There are far too many things happening right now in the news sphere, and it's not going to get any slower. So a couple of other things that are shaking up right now in the federal government. in the Trump administration, at least as far as Trump's plans in this second term are going. Over 1,000 EPA employees have been informed that they could be dismissed immediately. Over 20% at the moment of the federal workers who have been offered Trump's buyout for 7 months for them to, take it and leave. 20% of those at least have accepted. And the idea is that they have until, I believe, Thursday to take that offer. Otherwise, they could just be fired anyway. Then you have a situation over at the U.S. Treasury, in which case the Democrats are losing their ever-loving mind that, again, there is an audit going on of how the United States is dispersing funds that might be against the interests of the American people and in favor of, wanton corruption. That brings us over to what Trump is doing on the world stage and policies that Donald Trump has brought forward. So in the campaign, Donald Trump made a lot of noise about tariffs. And he talked about how wonderful they were and how he really liked them. He thought the United States should build on tariffs. And a lot of people suggested that Trump was going to completely crash the economy with tariffs. It was going to be terrible. Oh my gosh, this is the horror. Oh, tariffs are terrible. Everyone knows this. Why doesn't he? And I bit my tongue. And I held back for a minute and I waited because something seemed a little bit off regarding the tariff talk. During the Obama administration, President Barack Obama would announce when the United States, or through his Secretary of Defense, would announce when the United States was going to strike on a military target. And through that process, the targets of the United States would basically flee, scatter, get out of there, and the United States efforts were thwarted in that manner. Trump was very critical of this, so that when Trump came into office, Trump started striking with basic common sense quietness until the strike was done. Then he would come out and talk to the press about it. Now we have a situation in which the President of the United States, Donald Trump, back again, is unhappy with various countries for how they are operating economically, how they are or are not taking border security with the United States seriously, how they are or not taking their relationship with China seriously. And Trump has announced a series of tariffs. And now we are in what I've called the cycle. So the cycle begins. Donald Trump wants a foreign leader to do something. Now, it's something that the foreign leader is not willing to give up because the United States has been completely diminished in its world leadership role. And the United States is no longer a nation that says jump and other nations say how high. Now the United States say jump and other nations go, how much are you going to pay me under the table? Trump's not here to do that. The USAID days, those are over. So what is Trump actually doing in this case? So for Colombia, the United States started deporting violent, illegal aliens from Colombia to Colombia because that's where they came from. And so the president of Colombia got in front of the world and said, we're not taking your jets. Absolutely not. And even though they're Colombian citizens, we're not taking them back. And so Donald Trump says, fine, have some tariffs. And the left lost their ever-loving minds and said, oh, coffee's going to be more expensive and flowers are going to be more. Oh, how could he be so cruel and mean and terrible? And then Colombia caved. In less than 2 hours, the president of Colombia got on social media and announced that, oh, it was an administrative error. And actually come on in. I'll even give you my personal jet, because the United States, through tariffs, would have wiped out the Colombian economy. Then we got to Panama. And Trump is concerned, like many in the national security apparatus, and really just the public in general, that China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, is buying up infrastructure and trying to place embassies right at the tip of and then on the Panama Canal, which is where 70% of the United States naval trade goes through. And President Trump, understanding that that's not good, said, hey, Panama, give us more access to the canal, or maybe, we'll do something. And the president of Panama said no. And so Trump levied forth some tariffs. And then I heard the same thing that everyone else, oh man, Panama's going to break Trump. Oh, it's not going to work. Oh, Trump is, blustering and talking about how he's going to maybe invade Panama or do this or that with Panama. Oh man, he's not going to work and he's going to look like humiliated. Panama has since backed down and has canceled their renewal of the Belt and Road Initiative, cutting off ties in parts with Beijing, and has also canceled the fees for the foreseeable future for United States naval vessels traveling through the canal. That is a capitulation from both the president of Colombia and the president of Panama. Now we get to Mexico. Trump wants Mexico to make concessions. Trump also wants Mexico to put troops at the border, but Trump also wants Mexico to take fentanyl seriously, which Sheinbaum has not before. Mexico, partly owned by the cartels. Trump also theoretically, and I say theoretically because we don't know, also has expressed an interest in the United States perhaps targeting cartel members on Mexican soil. Sheinbaum said no to that, for sure. So Trump came through, and Trump said, all right, fine. Tariffs on everything we're buying from Mexico, certain higher tariffs on certain Mexican staple exports. And Senate Democrats, like the media, did the same thing again. Schumer came out and said, oh, Corona and avocados are going to be, oh, so expensive. Oh, no.
Let's just take Super Bowl Sunday, okay? It's going to affect beer, okay?
Look at him holding up the Corona.
Most of it, Corona here, comes from Mexico. It's going to affect your guac. Because what is guacamole made of? Avocados.
I love that the left never actually considers what some Americans might want the tariffs for. He immediately just comes out and says, you're not going to be able to have beer and guac. Come on. Hilarious. So then Sheinbaum caved. And Sheinbaum said that she would immediately supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border separating Mexico and the United States. Now, here's the catch. Mexico had agreed to place a number of National Guard troops on the border over the next 5 years. And Mexico had agreed to station troops at certain checkpoints, focusing mainly as a facilitation service in a humanitarian rescue effort. Now, Sheinbaum has flipped. Sheinbaum is now putting troops on the border to stop fentanyl. Additionally, the United States is moving forward in Mexican airspace to conduct reconnaissance operations against the Mexican cartels, which is a major, major shift. The United States is openly conducting flights over Baja California and over the coast of the western Mexican states, including Sinaloa, which is where the Sinaloan cartel is. Also, Mexico has since made a major arrest on a cartel leader, which is unheard of most of the time. So though some came out and said, oh, no, Mexico is already doing this, that's not how that works. That's not how that works at all. And then we get to Canada because Trump wanted Canada to beef up its border security. And Canada wouldn't. Trudeau's been an absolute jerk on every single front. Mr. Stand Up to Trump. So Trump announced tariffs on Canada. And then all of those on the left cheered and said, boy, Trudeau's going to stand up to Donald Trump and he's going to put counter tariffs on. And that alcohol that we've already purchased from the United States, well, we're not going to sell it in our stores. We're just going to leave it on the shelf for some reason. And that was the narrative that lasted for all of one day. And I knew where this was heading. And you knew where this was heading because the United States is a major exporter and importer. And so, sure enough, just less than a day later, Canada capitulated, and that brings us to the very last line the left has. Those on the radio, you'll have to catch us over on the live stream to finish that out. Thank you very much for tuning in over on the Radio Land. This is the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal. All right, that brings us to the response to the Canadian tariffs. So Trudeau capitulates and says, all right, fine. We will implement a $1.3 billion border plan that they already had on the books as a plan. They're now actually going to implement it. They're going to move forward with it. And then a number of other things that we'll detail in a second. And those on the left and those in the media immediately tried to jump on this and say, aha, see, Trudeau already did it. Mexico had their stuff they were already doing. Trudeau had their stuff. They already did. Trump's an idiot because he got stuff that they were already doing. No. That is not even remotely true. It's not even a good lie. Do better. Allow me to explain. Actually, you know what? No, don't allow me to explain. Here is Scott Jennings over on CNN humiliating a journalist from the Washington Post who believes, I guess, that Trudeau somehow got the exact same thing out going in.
Quantify what the actual impact is here. For people saying, look, the market bounced back. No tariffs were put into place. Trump got what he wanted. All's well. We'll do this again in 30 days. Is that kind of the reality from an economic perspective?
I mean, I don't know what Trump wanted in this situation. Again, he didn't actually get anything. But if he were to put these tariffs in place, they would be very painful for American consumers. Okay, Scott. I mean, this is
the total lie.
This is public information.
He got what he wanted. He got an agreement from our neighbors to do more on the border. That's what he wanted, and he got it.
Exactly what they have already been doing. I
understand you're the minister of propaganda tonight, but you don't have to be. You could just say, "Hey, all's well that ends well here." Come on.
If you don't know that these countries are committing to do exactly what they have already been doing, either you haven't done your homework or you think the American people are idiots. Because again, they're doing
option three. Donald Trump is enforcing what needs to be done at the border, which is more help from our friends. They are our allies and they are important people, but they need to help us, and they've not been helping us, and now they're going to help us even more.
They have been.
But the point is that it's also
ask every family with a fentanyl death how much they've been helping.
So that brings us to what Canada actually did. So again, according to Donald Trump, the tariffs have now been put on hold for 30 days. After receiving some concessions from Mexico. So according to a Truth Social post by Donald Trump on February 3rd, Mexico agreed to supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border. And then moving forward just a bit more to Canada, the Canadian government has now agreed to implement a $1.3 billion border plan. So the left has come forward and said, well, this $1.3 billion border plan, it was already on the books back in December. Okay, there is a difference between a plan and then a commitment to implement the plan. So there are a lot of plans that are currently on the Canadian ledger that are not at all going into effect. They are simply a plan that can possibly go forward. Donald Trump got Trudeau to commit, and the Canadian Parliament to commit, to implementing this $1.3 billion border plan immediately. Additionally, Canada is now also appointing a fentanyl czar. In this case, fentanyl is now going to be a specific task fought by the Canadian government. Before then, it was really just kind of a cultural and social concern of the Canadians. Additionally, the Canadian government is now agreeing to list all of the Mexican drug cartels and international trafficking drug cartels as terrorists along with the United States. That is major. That is a major change in policy. Then Donald Trump is also suggesting that he is ready as well to work with both nations to basically commit as much in funding and resources as the other country is. He's matching in this case for dollars and resources. And this brings us to a rather interesting series of events for the way that the Trump foreign policy is moving. Right now, as far as anyone else on the world stage is concerned, Donald Trump has a specific policy prescription, which is speak plainly and carry a big tariff. So Teddy Roosevelt had speak softly and carry a big stick. Trump has speak plainly and carry a big tariff. Here is the idea. Donald Trump wants something from a foreign leader. Could be anything. Could be additional work in foreign government. Could be about NATO. Could be about Panama and the Panama Canal. And the world leader, largely because of the diminished ability of the United States to lead, says no. And so Trump then moves forward and says, okay, well, then there will be consequences. And in the case of tariffs, if the world leader says, you're just bluffing, then Donald Trump moves away the bluff and says, okay, tariffs right here, right now. Now, humorously enough, just in case you were wondering how the idea of the trade war was going to go right off the bat, the Canadian dollar and the Mexican peso plummeted on day one, plummeted in relation to the United States dollar. And also the stock market, in fear because the media and the Democrats have been screaming around the clock that these are permanent tariffs and that Trump is going to go all in and it's going to be tariffs forever, started to dip. And the world leaders start to think, man, Donald Trump's serious about these tariffs. Our economy cannot withstand this. And so then they cave. And they cave pretty darn quickly. And what you are very likely to see over the next 30 days in the case of Mexico and Canada are better deals in favor of the United States. Now, a couple of really quick points that I am a little bit frustrated. Some are, I believe, choosing to ignore. So, number one, I do not believe that Donald Trump plays as much 4D chess as he's given credit of by a lot of people who support him. I don't. I do not believe that Donald Trump is always thinking 215 moves ahead. I think that Trump is, just as he has written before in The Art of the Deal, just as he has acted before in presidential debates and presidential campaigns and policy in his first administration, policy in this administration, he is very, very easy to read when it comes to his deals. Trump will make a threat that he can make good on, and he will use the full weight of that threat and the resources at his disposal to punch with all his might. And if you want to avoid the punch, you will do what it is that he is looking for. That's Trump's strategy. That's it. Donald Trump plays chicken in a semi loaded with cinder blocks. And if you do not want to be hit by the semi, you will get out of his lane. That's how he does it. Now, here's the problem. There are two common criticisms that come forward, one more from the right and one more from the left. The first common criticism is that, well, trade tariffs are really terrible international policy. Or maybe put in a different way, tariffs don't work. As an economic policy, do tariffs work? Like long-term tariffs? No, they don't work. They do not work. It makes the consumer pay more. However, I have not yet seen Donald Trump use tariffs as an economic policy. Now, has Trump talked about ending the income tax and putting tariffs back in? Absolutely. He has talked about that. He has not done that yet, though. We have now gone through at least 4 cycles in which a government individual, a leader, whether from Panama or Colombia or Mexico, Canada, you could even bring up Venezuela, for instance, has suggested they are not going to work with the United States. And so Donald Trump, in retaliation, says, okay, fine, you depend on our economy. My citizens are buying your goods. What if things sucked for you because you're hurting Americans? What if Americans hurt you? And then Donald Trump puts in tariffs. That's not economic policy. I know some of you out there are suggesting just perhaps that, well, actually, this is some kind of like economic plan to put the United States on a tariff system. It's not. It's just not that deep. It just ain't. And most of us, including those listening to the show, watching the show, understand that this is a very simple foreign policy, and it's a very effective foreign policy so far. So far, it's worked. It's worked 4 out of 4. You may not like it. That's fine. You may think that's dangerous. That's fine. You may say, well, that's not always going to work. That's fine. But you also might say, which is the second criticism, as well, Donald Trump says all kinds of things, and Donald Trump said that we were going to have a tariff policy and that Donald Trump was going to do this, this, and this, and then he got something else entirely. Okay, boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a bit of a secret about negotiation. Did you know that if you go in front of the public, if you go in front of Congress and you say, all right, guys, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell them I want A, B, and C in the negotiation. That is what we need, A, B, and C. That's what we're going to get. And then you go to the world leader and you say, I would like A, B, C, and D. And the world leader is then going to look at you and know that your baseline is A, B, and C. And then he will extort from you whatever he needs to do in order to give you what was your baseline. If Donald Trump comes out in front of the entire public, in front of the entire world and says, these are all of the things that I want to get and that I must get, and then he goes to the world leaders and says, I want these things, they know that Donald Trump needs to have that entire list complete or he does not succeed. That's not what's happening here. Donald Trump blusters all the time. Am I always a fan of it? No. I'm not. But if you think that Donald Trump is letting the entire world know what it is the United States is seeking in international policy, then you are just as foolish as the individual who believed it was necessary for Barack Obama to telegraph whom we were striking before we struck militarily. Donald Trump views the economy and the military in the same way. He always has. He said it openly. He's very clear about it. He's just not extremely overt in how he describes it when he's trying to do the negotiation. But that's it. Is that deep? Is that 40 chess? No. That's checkers. And you know what? A lot of people suck at checkers. Trump, in this case, he doesn't suck at checkers. That's it. That's what tariffs do. Now, by the way, is that an endorsement of tariffs as an economic policy? No. Is that a suggestion that Donald Trump is always going to get everything he wants? No. Is that how I would do foreign policy? I don't know. I'm not the president of the United States, and every day I thank God. So as far as foreign policy is concerned, and I am sorry. I looked over into the comments for a section, and there are two people who have commented that Donald Trump has, something. No one has read The Art of the Deal. I actually did about a month and a half ago. I was like, you know what? With Trump winning, I probably should actually read The Art of the Deal by now. I actually did go and read it, and yeah, it is pretty overtly stated. And by the way, am I suggesting that Trump is a master negotiator? No, he's got like an inside card that works, and he uses it. The idea that Trump is making a bunch of claims and like a doddering old fool, he has no idea what he's doing, and so he just throws it all out and tries to catch it back in. Again, that's not true either. I've seen Trump describe real estate and economic policy in terms of California in a laid-back, relaxed fashion to Joe Rogan of all people. I'm pretty sure that if Trump goes out and makes claims like he did this evening regarding Gaza, if you think that Trump is always playing the first card and expects the first card in return, you have not been paying attention to economic or international policy. And with Trump, both are kind of a big deal for him, given the Abraham Accords, given tax reform, given the new free trade agreements that he orchestrated in his first term between the United States and Canada, the United States, Mexico, and Canada. There are a series of situations over the next couple of weeks when this is likely going to be prescient again, especially considering the 30-day timer is up. So, assigning that Trump is a masterful genius playing 4D chess? Nah. Assigning that Trump is like caving to world leaders because he has no idea what he's doing? Nah. It's just a simple negotiation strategy. We'll be back in just a couple of seconds here. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal.
The Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal, joined by Stephen Kent from the Consumer Choice Center for a little bit of Watchin. Now, normally we don't do this, but we're going to start off with something you should not be watching, and that is the open porn on display at the Grammys. Just straight up nudity now, just right in front of the country on national television. I pray that you did not catch that.
I didn't know they put sex work on TV. Isn't that what we're supposed to call porn now? So,
well, let's take it away, because you had a recommendation. So if you don't want to watch something atrocious and awkward and gross and weird, instead, I believe you had a little something about The Lioness, which we should be watching.
Yeah, I mean, Lioness is the show that I've been most interested in this week. It is, it did come out last year at the end of 2024, the new season on Paramount Plus. This is one of Taylor Sheridan's action shows, CIA dramas over on Paramount. It stars Nicole Kidman, Zoe Saldana, and has appearances from Taylor Sheridan, as well as Michael Kelly. You might know him as the chief of staff from House of Cards, who served Kevin Spacey. And Morgan Freeman's the president. You can't go wrong with this show. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it.
Okay. You had me with Morgan Freeman as the president of the United States. I'm here. I'm here for that.
Morgan Freeman as president.
Yeah. When I first appointed Andy Dufresne. All right. So that's good. All right. I did hear, I will say, a bit of a rumor that I am interested in getting your take on. This is about Netflix, right? So I'm told that we're getting ready for another Narnia movie. You've got a bit of a prediction, though, on what you think the Narnia movie is that Netflix has taken to task.
I do. So this is Netflix leading a C.S. Lewis revival with a new line of Narnia films directed by and produced by Greta Gerwig. You might know her for Little Women, Lady Bird, and the Barbie movie. And we don't know for sure what the first movie is going to be. I think most consumers are anticipating The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but they will be disappointed because a casting call has leaked out online indicating that Netflix is trying to find a 10-year-old boy and 11-year-old girl for the lead roles in this new Narnia movie that they're going to do, which matches the descriptions and age of the two main characters in The Magician's Nephew, chronologically book 1 in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. So this movie has never been adapted, or this book has never been adapted before.
And it's kind of a wild take to start with that as well, because it's like starting The Lord of the Rings with the Silmarillion. I mean, it's I don't know if I really would have started chronologically there. It's got a lot of background stuff and a lot of jumping in and out of puddles that I'm not quite sure. I'm a little confused. What do you think?
Those are not puddles. Those are portals. That is the wood between the worlds, which you might recognize as the world between the worlds in Star Wars, by the way.
Let me clarify, though. When I mean jumping out of puddles, I mean it is kind of primordial in a sense. I mean that it is a lot of like in the beginning style stuff going on. At least maybe it's been way too long since I've actually read The Magician's Nephew and I'm dead wrong here, but it does feel a little Silmarillion-y, doesn't it?
No, I don't think C.S. Lewis is that complicated. I mean, when you think about the Silmarillion and Tolkien, you're talking about the highest of high fantasy languages, all these sort of wild kingdoms, these subcultures that he made in Middle-earth. Narnia is not that complicated. What Magician's Nephew basically gives us is, where does the wardrobe come from? And why does it provide a portal for children, the Pevensey kids, into this world called Narnia? So what you learn in this book is about a story that occurs beforehand, and Narnia is created from scratch. We meet Aslan. He makes Narnia this new perfect world, and it is tainted by sin, if you will, with the inclusion of the White Witch, previously known as Queen Jadis. And so we're going to learn the origin of the White Witch. We'll get the origin of Narnia and the origin of the wardrobe, and then that tees up The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But the reason that a lot of Narnia fans and C.S. Lewis scholars don't advocate for starting with Magician's Nephew is it demystifies Narnia, that you sort of have it explained to you how it exists and where it came from, and then it becomes a little less magical. So you start with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then you jump back. But
well, and this is why I would advocate that it does have some Silmarillion-y aspects to it. Mm-hmm. Is that it's not that it's high language and the actual content of it, but that it hits the themes of a Genesis, the first couple of chapters of Genesis kind of a situation where you really are setting the stage, you are introducing the larger characters, the moral framework in this case, the Queen Jadis to the White Witch and Aslan, literally creating Narnia, right? Mm-hmm. So what you do see is like that introductory style Old Testament creation story in a way. I mean, it's not exactly the same, of course not, but it really does hit a lot of those same tones. And that's why I'm with you. It's like, I'm very intrigued because I love that kind of a thing. I mean, I'm sure the visual effects are going to be just incredible. I was shocked that the Uglies movie, which we'll have to talk about another time, which took on the first book in Scott Westerfeld's Uglies teen young adult novel series, did the same thing. The special effects were used to fill in some of the gaps that maybe when we were reading these books as kids, our minds couldn't necessarily picture. And it's a really neat thing about all of these adaptations we're seeing to streaming services, that it's no longer super cheesy CGI, at least the most of it. You know what I'm saying?
No, of course. And one of the great things about The Magician's Nephew is that a good half of the story takes place in London. You have the kids who hop into sort of the magical world on the other side of a portal. Right. And then they accidentally bring the White Witch back into London. And the White Witch goes on a rampage throughout London, stealing a horse and buggy, stealing clothes, stealing jewelry, and all this stuff, just wreaking havoc with the police chasing her. You can sort of imagine this almost after seeing the Paddington movies and seeing sort of a situational comedy play out in Great Britain, that this sort of will be very in line with that in terms of a vibe. And I think you'll require less special effects, but you know, we're going to be talking about making a fantastical world with talking animals from scratch, which is sort of the nature of Narnia. And I am exasperated with CGI beavers and wolves and bears. I just would love if we went back to the days of animals being real in movies. Do you remember like White Fang and sort of the adaptations for some of these movies in the 1990s, where it was really common to actually have live dogs for canine-driven movies? Do you remember this at all?
I do. I would say that I remember the terms of back in the day, that animals that are speaking, that were live action, they just didn't move their mouth, like they spoke telepathing. So yes. Like in Homeward Bound, Homeward Bound movies are like those. They're real animals, and then you just have the voice actors. They have to watch carefully. Which, oh man, there's a clip I want to show you. We don't have enough time, but I actually got to watch over the weekend the minions be voice acted in, I think, Despicable Me, or maybe it was the Minions movie. And it was just like watching the voice actors or actresses in this case speak them. I don't know. I like that better than the moving mouth thing. Although I wasn't super upset, I guess, by the Beavers and the Wolves in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But I guess I wouldn't mind going back to that telepathic age where the animals have to communicate the emotions. Other than that, what do you think?
No, I think there's something to be said for that. But, you know, even in Narnia, so Aslan in The Magician's Nephew creates tiers of animals. There are animals that don't speak and there are animals that do speak. And those are sort of the higher animals, which are meant to govern all the rest. So like the beavers are a good example of that. But the big picture story here, just for all your listeners, is Narnia is coming back November 2026. We haven't seen C.S. Lewis on screen in well over a decade. It's been like 15 years. So this will be quite a return for this old IP to see if it actually finds legs. It was absolutely crushed by the Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter craze of the early 2000s.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if the Narnia story can find a footing and resonate in 2025, 2026.
Stephen Kent for Watchin. We'll be back not too long after. There are a few other things I want to pitch your way, and we might have to do another segment just for crazy ideas Tony pitches that Stephen knocks down. Not very catchy, but I'm thinking you're going to like it.
Thanks, Tony.
We'll be back in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Closing time.
I can actually hear producer Daniel cheering that Closing Time actually ended up being the last bumper track for the show. A little bit more appropriate for bonus tonus. So a few things to tie up here at the end of the show. Another piece of breaking news is now being reported. Pam Bondi has been confirmed as the next Attorney General of the United States. That is, of course, huge. This is, I believe the vote was 54 to 46. All Republicans voted in favor of Pam Bondi, including a Democrat, John Fetterman. John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Senator Betterman. Again, that doesn't make him not a Democrat. I remind you that he does indeed vote extremely far to the left, but he understands something that the rest of the Democrats do not. Getting out in front of the American citizens right now on TV, on social media, whatever, and acting like a crazy person is not what Americans want. The times of crisis, the times of uncertainty, when Americans are nervous, when Americans are scared, when Americans don't know what's coming, when Americans have questions, the opposition party getting out every time anything just might have a little bit of a question mark on it, and getting out in front of those people and just doing some calisthenics and yelling and screaming and saying we're at war and everything's over and we gotta just toss everything up and over. That's not what people are looking for. That's not what people are looking for. The Democrats have not figured this out. And by the way, I will remind those during the Biden administration that when Republicans did the same thing, it did not help them. That throwing an absolute fit over the Speaker of the House and having a big multi-week fisticuff match did not help Republicans. It made them look silly. Well, now here we are in the second Trump administration, in which Trump walked in with a record high approval rating and started trying to get individuals appointed through Senate confirmation hearings. And Democrats couldn't hold it together for just one of them. Couldn't hold it together. Started out with Pete Hegseth setting themselves on fire through Pam Bondi's hearing. And now Pam Bondi has been confirmed as the next Attorney General of the United States. Now, can we please have that be enough news for this evening? I'm tired. I'm not particularly feeling super great. Can we just keep it with the breaking news for just a moment here? I haven't even finished getting everyone through the clips in the first segment. I haven't even got to tell you the craziest thing that Representative Jasmine Crockett said this week, which again, she openly incited insurrection with other Democrats out in front of the USAID building this evening from the footage over in Washington, D.C. boy, I guarantee that'll take a whole show to get into. Whenever the Democrats get together for some protesting, it's always mostly peaceful. So the craziest thing that Jasmine Crockett said this week, and again, just acting like clowns in front of America is, well, who am I to take away from the inspiring words of Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas?
That's what's happening right now. I am tired of the white tears. Listen, if you are competent, you are not concerned. When I walk into Congress every single day, you know why I don't feel a way and why you can't make me doubt who I am is because I know that I had to work 10 times as hard as they did just to get into the seat. When you look and you compare me to Marjorie Taylor Greene or me to Lauren Boebert, there is no comparison. And that is the life that we have always lived. So the only people that are crying are the mediocre white boys that have been beaten out by people that historically have had to work so much harder. This is why they don't want us to have education.
So we'll work through that just a little bit at a time here for those of you who were just, again, hit with that amazing crackhead rant that one finds outside a speedway in the morning. So we'll work backwards here just for a little bit of a mix up. When she says that individuals like her had to work harder, but that the reason that white boys are mad is because there are individuals, I'm assuming that she means black women in this case, but she may not. She seems to be indicating that she says black women when she's talking about this in the opposite of white boys, that they are losing to more competent, to more talented black women. Here's a question. If as a group, if you believe in group identity being a marker of skill, which is very stupid, but if you believe that black women are better than white boys, then why did it take affirmative action to put them in government? Why did it take federal policy to make sure that they were hired? If they were already so competent that they were better than everyone, then why aren't they at the top of every field naturally? The last time I checked, there aren't exactly any policies at Harvard that require them to hire or to accept a lot of Asian students. In fact, Harvard had policies limiting the number of Asian students that could apply. Asians who, by the way, have faced systemic discrimination in the United States. I will remind you that there was a time in which Asian people in the United States, especially out west, were subject to incredible amounts of racism and were forced at near slave labor conditions to build railroads, to work in sweatshops, and not to mention being interned in the Japanese and other Asian internment camps by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Second World War. But yet I don't really see Harvard like trying to go out and get more Asian applicants. So why are there so many Asian students at Harvard? Man, maybe there is a cultural aspect with some individuals of Asian descent that encourages students to reach for the stars and get into Ivy League institutions. Maybe it's an individual's merit and what they aim for and achieve that is either encouraged or discouraged by one's culture that actually gets someone into an institution. But Jasmine Crockett, by getting out there and saying, it's all them white boys. Okay. You know what? Here, let's do a little research here. Jasmine Crockett's district in Dallas, Texas. Let's take a gander here. Okay, Jasmine Crockett's district is Black or African American, non-Hispanic, 40%, white non-Hispanic, 18.3%, white Hispanic, 16.6%, Hispanic primarily not considered white, 9.92%, and other Hispanic, 8.54%. Okay, so if you add up the math here, let's just do little calculations here. That would mean that less than half of the people in Jasmine's district are of black descent or that particular skin tone, if you want to frame it out that way. I don't think that suggesting that, oh, it's just a bunch of people crying because, black women are in charge. I don't think that's really a good election strategy there, Jasmine. I don't think that if you are talking about representing an entire group of people, that you would demonize specific racial groups. Kind of went through a whole civil rights movement to kick that one to the curb. But This is what the Democrats are trying right now. Now, this was the case made for Donald Trump during the 2024 election cycle. Okay, Trump, here's what you do. Biden, really unpopular. Kamala Harris, really unpopular. The Biden administration, from Alejandro Mayorkas to Lloyd Austin to Pete Buttigieg, very unpopular. The Department of Health and Human Services has Rachel Levine, a dude in a dress, who is being really weird and creepy. That's the assistant health secretary. All right, what you got to do, Trump, is you just go and you stand there and you just point at them and you say, look at what they did. Now, same advice, though I am a little bit loath to give good advice to the left. Here's some really great advice. If you want to gain trust with the American people and the American voters, and right now, if Trump does something that you find insane, if Trump does something that you find crazy, if you find it unwise, if you find it bad for the American people, then what you do is you get out in front of the country and you point. Don't say anything. Don't go crying in front of buildings like AOC in front of the Border Patrol entrance road to the Border Patrol facility that she cried in front of back during the first Trump administration. Don't, go out there and suggest that everyone's going to die and that and everything we're at war and we need to shut down the Senate like the New Jersey representative did, or allow Jasmine Crockett to speak in public ever. Going out there and out crazying any Republican that speaks, boy, that, you know what that's going to do? That's going to take anything that Republicans do that may or may not be a good thing, and then it's going to the voters, it's going to go, well, it's not that bad, because after all, if they're making every single thing a mountain, then I guess that these all must be molehills. Midterms are not looking pretty so far for the Democrats. And by the way, I do want to make one note. Earlier, when I was talking about some of Trump's policies, in which he's moving very hard, very fast, and when he's talking about federal staffing, in Trump's offer to buy out the remainder 7 months for federal agency staffers, I said that 20% had resigned. I misspoke. That's 20,000 individuals have accepted the offer. That's about 1% of federal workers. So making sure that we get that nice and clean before we head out of the show. Also, on a little bit of a cultural note before we end the show, there has been some discussion in the comments section of the live stream that in order to watch the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson, which are phenomenal movies, that you must first watch the Hobbit trilogy, is one of the worst pieces of advice that I've ever heard anyone give. The Hobbit trilogy is undoubtedly the worst fantasy trilogy series to be released as a trilogy in media. It is horrible, horrible. It takes the plot of The Hobbit, which did not need to be 3 movies, maybe 2 movies at best, and added a bunch of junk to it that no one needed, like weird romantic love plots between dwarves and elves and mystical villains like goblins that like barely appear in the original book. It completely rewrites the plot points and makes Bilbo out to be way more of a hero than he actually is. Sorry, the reason I point this out is that if you're going to read something good and you're going to watch something good, here's what you do. You read The Hobbit. I'm also like rereading The Hobbit again right now and did while I was traveling to Utah this weekend. So that's why I took the comments a little extra seriously. You read The Hobbit, which is a phenomenal piece of literature and is one of the best portrayals of the hero's journey in literature, period. And then you read The Lord of the Rings. And then you watch The Lord of the Rings. It's phenomenal, great acting, great soundtrack. It cuts some things out from the books because, Tolkien wrote everything. And doesn't really change the plot that much. The Hobbit is just like a weird fan fiction of the book. And just to... the comments are already grumpy. I will make this case for you. It has long been a fight that I do not like the Hobbit movies. There is a photo that I'm sure will someday be released to the internet in which I dressed up once to go with a group of friends in high school with a family that I was close to go see The Hobbit in theaters. And we walked out of the movie theater, and a lot of the individuals in our friend group were giddy. They thought it was great, and they thought that Oh, what's his name? The guy who played the Hobbit, who's a really excellent actor. I really like him. Martin Freeman. Wait, not Martin Freeman. I must not have that right. Yeah, Martin Freeman. All right, great. Martin Freeman, great actor. You know, they were gushing about how wonderful he was and how great the movie was, and I was very sour in the vehicle going home. I kind of ruined the vibe, but that's because it's a terrible movie. Hey, I was raised on really good books, and I tell you what, it was not good. Hobbit is not a great trilogy. It's horribly written, and what a waste of Benedict Cumberbatch voicing Smaug the dragon. So those of you who didn't really enjoy that little off tangent, well, that was at the end of the show. So hey, maybe you already shut it off on the podcast side, and you know what? That's okay, because if you're not here by then, that's totally not going to reach you anyway. With that said, thank you very much for tuning in this evening. It's always a blast to get to do this show with y'all. We'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully my voice will be a little more clear and a little less gravelly so it doesn't sound like a Marlboro commercial. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.